We are in Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. We are continuing Lucullus. Mithridates, through the knavery of his officers, not knowing for some time the want of provision in his camp, was troubled in mind that the Cusicanians should hold out against him. But his ambition and anger fell when he saw his soldiers in the extremity of want, and feeding on men's flesh, as in truth Lucullus was not carrying on the war as a mere matter of show and stage play, but, according to the proverb, made the seat of war in the belly, and did everything to cut off their supplies of food. Mithridates therefore took advantage of the time while Lucullus was storming a fort, and sent away almost all his horse to Bithynia with the sumpter cattle, and as many of the foot as were unfit for service. On intelligence of which, Lucullus, while it was yet night, came to the camp, and in the morning, though it was stormy weather, took with him 10 cohorts of foot and the horse, and pursued them under falling snow, and in cold so severe that many of his soldiers were unable to proceed. And with the rest coming upon the enemy near the river Rundacus, he overthrew them with so great a slaughter that the very women of Apollonia came out to seize on the booty and strip the slain. Great numbers, as we may suppose, were slain. 6,000 horses were taken, and with an infinite number of beasts of burden, and no less than 15,000 men, all of which he led along by the enemy's camp. I cannot but wonder on the occasion at Sallust, who says that this was the first time camels were seen by the Romans, as if he thought those who long before under Scipio defeated Antiochus are those who lately had fought against Archelaus near Orchomenus and Cavrania. Had not known what a camel was, Mithridates himself, fully determined upon flight, as mere delays and diversions for Lucullus, sent his admiral Aristonicus to the Greek Sea, who, however, was betrayed in that very instant of going off, and Lucullus became master of him, and 10,000 pieces of gold which he was carrying with him to corrupt some of the Roman army. After which Mithridates himself made for the sea, leaving the foot officers to conduct the army, and upon whom Lucullus fell near the river Granicus, where he took a vast number alive and slew 20,000. It is reported that the total number killed of fighting men and of others who followed the camp amounted to something not far short of 300,000. Lucullus first went to Cyzicus, where he received with all the joy and gratitude suiting the occasion, and then collected a navy, visiting the shores of the Hellespont, and arriving at Troas, he lodged in the temple of Venus, where in the night he thought he saw her coming to him, and sang, "Sleepest thou, great lion, when the fawns are at night? Sleepest thou, great lion, when the fawns are nigh?" Rising up hereupon, he called his friends to him, it being yet night, and told them his vision, at which instant some Elians came up and acquainted him that 13 of the king's conquerors were seen off the Achaean harbor, sailing for Lemnos, he at once put to sea, took these, and slew their admiral Isidoros. And then he made after another squadron, who were just come into port, and were hauling their vessels ashore, but fought from the decks, and sorely galled Lucullus's men, and there being neither room to sail round them, nor to bear upon them for any damage, his ships being afloat, while there stood secure and fixed on the sand, after much ado, at the only landing place of the island, he disembarked the choicest of his men, who falling upon the enemy behind, killed some, and forced others to cut their cables, and thus making from the shore, they fell upon one another, or came within the reach of Lucullus's fleet. Many were killed in the action. Among the captives was Marius, the commander sent by Sertorius, who had but one eye, and it was Lucullus's strict command to his men before the engagement that they should kill no man who had but one eye, that he might rather die under disgrace and reproach. I mean, why should it be shameful if a person was injured, unless they hurt themselves? This being over, he hastened his pursuit after Mithridates, whom he hoped to still find in Bithynia, intercepted by Vulcanius, whom he sent out before Nicomedia with part of the fleet to stop his flight. But Vulcanius, loitering in Samothrace, to get initiated and celebrate a feast, let slip his opportunity, with the dates being passed by with all his fleet, he hastening into Pontus before Lucullus should come up to him, was caught in a storm, which dispersed his fleet and sunk several ships. The wrecks floated on all the neighboring shore for many days after. The merchant ship, in which he himself was, could not well in that heavy swell he brought ashore by the masters for its bigness, and that it being heavy with water and ready to sink, he left it, and went abroad, a pirate vessel, delivering himself into the hands of pirates, and thus unexpectedly and wonderfully came safe to Heraclea in Pontus. Thus the proud language Lucullus had used to the Senate ended without any mischance, for they having decreed him 3,000 talents to furnish out a navy, he himself was against it, and sent them word that, without any such great and costly supplies, by the Confederate shipping alone, he did not in the least doubt but to rout Mithridates from the sea. And so he did by divine assistance, for it is said that the wrath of Diana of Priapus brought the great tempest upon the men of Pontus, because they had robbed her temple and removed her image. Many were persuading Lucullus to defer the war, but he rejected their counsel and marched through Bithynia and Galatia into the king's country in such great scarcity of provision at first, that 30,000 Galatians followed, every man carrying a bushel of wheat at his back, but subduing all in his progress before him. He at last found himself in such great plenty that an ox was sold in the camp for a single drachma, and a slave for 4. The other booty they made no account of, but left it behind or destroyed it, there being no disposing of it, where all had such abundance. But when they had made frequent incursions with their cavalry, and had advanced as far as Demescora and the plains of the Thermodon, merely laying waste the country before them, they began to find fault with Lucullus, asking why he took so many towns by surrender, and never one by storm, which might enrich them with the plunder. And now, forsooth, leaving Amisus behind, a rich and wealthy city, of easy conquest, if closely besieged. He will carry us into Tibarenian and Chaldean wilderness to fight with Mithridates. And see, they're missing the point of war. It's not about the plunders. If you can, they're not your enemies. They're not threats. That Lucullus, little thinking this would be of such dangerous consequence as it afterwards proved, took no notice and slighted it. It was rather anxious to excuse himself to those who blamed his tardiness in losing time about small, pitiful places not worth the while, and allowing Mithridates opportunity to recruit. That is what I design, said he, and sit here contriving, by my delay, that he may grow great again, and gather a considerable army, which may induce him to stand and not fly away before us. For do you not see the wide and unknown wilderness behind? Caucasus is not far off, and a multitude of vast mountains, enough to conceal 10,000 kings that wish to avoid a battle. Besides this, a journey but of a few days leads from Cabira to Armenia, where Tigranes reigns, king of kings, and holds in his hands a power that has enabled him to keep the Parthians in narrow bounds, to remove Greek cities bodily into Media, to conquer Syria and Palestine, to put to death the kings of the royal line of Seleucus, and to carry away their wives and daughters by violence, the same as relation and son-in-law to Mithridates, and cannot but receive him upon entreaty, and enter into war with us to defend him, so that while we endeavor to dispose Mithridates, we shall endanger the bringing in of Tigranes against us, who already has occasion to fall out with us, but can never find one so justifiable in the succor of a friend. And, Prince, it is necessity. Why, therefore, should we put Mithridates upon the resource, who as yet does not see how he may best fight with us, and disdains to stoop to Tigranes, and not rather allow him to gather a new army and grow confident again, that we may thus fight with Colchians and Tibarenians, whom we have defeated already, and not with Medes and Armenians. Upon these motives, Lucullus sat down before Amisus, and slowly carried on the siege. But the winter being well spent, he left Murena in charge of it, and went himself against Mithridates. Then, rendezvousing at Cabira, and resolving to await the Romans with 40,000 foot about him and 14,000 horse, on whom he chiefly confided, passing the river Lacus, he challenged the Romans into the plains, where the cavalry engaged, and the Romans were beaten. Pomponius, a man of some note, was taken wounded and sore, and in pain as he was, carried before Mithridates, and asked by the king if he would become his friend, if he save his life. He answered, yes, if you become reconciled to the Romans, if not, your enemy. Mithridates wondered at him, and did him no hurt, the enemy being with their cavalry master of the plains. Lucullus was something afraid, and hesitated to enter the mountains, being very large, woody, and almost inaccessible, when, by good luck, some Greeks who had fled into a cave were taken, the eldest of whom Artemidoros, by name, promised to bring Lucullus and seat him in a place of safety for his army, where there was a fort that overlooked Cabira. Lucullus, believing him, lighted his fires and marched in the night, and safely passing the defile, gained the place, and in the morning was seen above the enemy, pitching his camp in a place advantageous to descend upon them if he desired to fight, and secure from being forced if he preferred to lie still. Neither side was willing to engage at present, but it is related that some of the king's party were hunting a stag, and some Romans, wanting to cut them off, came out and met them, whereupon they skirmished, more still drawing together each side, and at last the king's party prevailed, on which the Romans from their camp, seeing their companions fly, were enraged, and ran to Lucullus with entreaties to lead them out, demanding that the sign might be given for battle. But he, that they might know of what consequence the presence and appearance of a wise commander is in the time of conflict and danger, ordered them to stand still, but he went down himself into the plains, and, meeting with the foremost that fled, commanded them to stand, and turned back with him. These obeying, the rest and turned, and formed again in a body, and thus, with no great difficulty, drove back the enemies, and pursued them to their camp. After his return, Lucullus inflicted the customary punishment upon the fugitives, and made them dig a trench of 12 foot, working in their frocks unfastened, while the rest stood by and looked on. There was in Mithridates' camp one Althacus, a chief of the Dandarians, a barbarous people, living near the lake Maatis, a man remarkable for strength and courage in fight, wise in counsel, and pleasant and ingratiating in conversation. He, out of emulation and a constant eagerness which possessed him to outdo one of the other chiefs of his country, promised a great piece of service to Mithridates in no less than the death of Lucullus. The king commended his resolution, and according to agreement counterfeited anger, and put some disgrace upon him, whereupon he took horse and fled to Lucullus, who kindly received him, being a man of great name in the army. After some short trial of his sagacity and perseverance, he found way to Lucullus's board and council. The Dandarian, thinking he had a fair opportunity, commanded his servants to lead his horse out of the camp, while he himself, as the soldiers were refreshing and resting themselves, it being then high noon, went to the general's tent, not at all expecting that entrance would be denied to one who was so familiar with him, and came under pretense of extraordinary business with him. He had certainly been admitted, had not slept, which has destroyed many captains, saved Lucullus, for it was so, and Menedemus, one of the bedchamber, was standing at the door, who told Althacus that it was altogether unseasonable to see the general, since, after long watching and hard labor, he was but just before laid down to repose himself. Althacus would not go away upon this denial, but still persisted, saying that he must go in to speak of some necessary affairs, whereupon Menedemus grew angry, and replied that nothing was more necessary than the safety of Lucullus, and forced him away with both hands, upon which, out of fear, he straightway left the camp, took horse, and, without effect, returned to Mithridates. Thus, in action and in physic, it is the critical moment that gives both the fortunate and the fatal effect. After this, Sornatius, being sent out with 10 companies for forage, and pursued by Menander, one of Mithridates' captains, stood his ground, and, after a sharp engagement, routed and slew a considerable number of the enemy. Arianus being sent afterwards with some forces to procure food enough at a spare for the camp. Mithridates did not let the opportunity slip, but dispatched Menemachus and Muro with a great force, both horse and foot, against him, all which except 2 men, it is stated, were cut off by the Romans. Mithridates concealed the loss, giving it out that it was a small defeat, nothing near so great as reported, and occasioned by the unskilfulness of the leaders. But Adrianus, in great pomp, passed by his camp, having many wagons full of corn and other booty, filling Mithridates with distress and the army with confusion and consternation. It was resolved, therefore, to stay no longer. But when the king's servants sent away their own goods quietly, and hindered others from doing so too, the soldiers, in great fury, thronged and crowded to the gates, seized on the king's servants and killed them, and plundered the baggage. Dryden, the general, in this confusion, having nothing else besides his purple cloak, lost his life for that, and Hermaus the priest was trod under foot in the gate. I'm tumbling here. Mithridates, having not one of his guards, nor even a groom remaining with him, got out of the camp in the throng, but had none of his horses with him until Ptolemy, the eunuch, some little time after, seeing him in the press making his way among the others, dismounted and gave his horse to the king. The Romans were already close upon him in their pursuit, nor was it through want of speed that they failed to catch him, but they were as near as possible doing so, but greediness and a petty military avarice hindered him from acquiring that booty in which so many fights and hazards they had sought after, and lost Lucullus, the prize of victory. For the horse which carried the king was within reach, but one of the mules that carried the treasure, either by accident stepping in, or by order of the king, so appointed to go between him and the pursuers, they seized and pilfered the gold, and falling out among themselves about the prey, let slip their great prize. Neither was their greediness prejudicial to Lucullus in this only, but also they slew Callistratus, the king's confidential attendant, under suspicion of having 500 pieces of gold in his girdle. That'd be heavy, right? Whereas Lucullus had specially ordered that he could be conveyed safe into the camp, notwithstanding all which he gave them leave to plunder the camp. After this, in Cabira and other strongholds which he took, he found great treasures in private prisons, in which many Greeks and many of the king's relations had been confined, who, having long since counted themselves no other than dead men, by the favor of Lucullus met not with relief so truly as with a new life and second birth. Nessa, also sister of Mithridates, enjoyed the like fortunate captivity, while those that seemed to be most out of danger, his wives and sisters, at Pharnacia, placed in safety as they thought, miserably perished. Mithridates in his flight sending Bacchides the eunuch to them, among others that were 2 sisters of the king, Roxana and Statira, unmarried women, 40 years old, and 2 Ionian wives. Berenice of Chios and Manim of Miletus. This latter was the most celebrated among the Greeks, because she so long withstood the king in his courtship to her, though he presented her with 15,000 pieces of gold, until a covenant of marriage was made, and a crown was sent her, and she was saluted a queen. She had been a sorrowful woman before, and often bewailed her beauty, that had procured her a keeper, instead of a husband, and a watch of barbarians, instead of the home and attendance of a wife, and removed far from Greece. She enjoyed the pleasure which she proposed to herself only in a dream, being in the meantime robbed of that which is real. Well, dreams are real in a different sense, perhaps. But we have the earlier in the reading today, the guy who joined a cult in order to take part in their rituals, and well, if you make your way through the rituals, but don't just have some escapism. Well, it's something to do rather than focus on the rest of life, right, or something. And when Bacchides came and bade them prepare for death, as everyone thought most easy and painless, she took the diadem from her head, and fastening the string to her neck, suspended herself with it, which soon breaking, "O wretched headband," said she, "not able to help me even in this small thing." Well, suicide's not a small thing, thank you very much, but, and throwing it away, she spat on it and offered her throat to Bacchides. Bernice had prepared a potion for herself, but at her mother's entreaty, who stood by, she gave her part of it. Both drank the potion, which prevailed over the weaker body, but Bernice, having drunk too little, was not released by it, but lingering on, unable to die, was strangled by Bacchides for haste. It is said that one of the unmarried sisters drank the potion with bitter execrations and curses, but Statira uttered nothing ungentle or reproachful, but on the contrary commended her brother, who in his own danger neglected not theirs, but carefully provided that they might go out of the world without shame or disgrace. Well, someone else victimizing you isn't really shame or disgrace, and especially Greek women or something back in the day or something. It's not like it came upon a group of social justice warriors and made quit with killing them all by hand or something. He's but anyways, it's but yeah, if you're gonna get killed anyways, what, you're gonna kill yourself because, oh, I don't want, someone's gonna probably kill me if I don't kill myself. Yeah. Lucullus, being a good and humane man, was concerned at these things. However, going on, he came to Talaura, from whence, 4 days before his arrival, Mithridates had fled, and was got to Ticinus in Armenia. He turned off, therefore, and subdued the Chaldeans and Tibarenians with the lesser Armenia, and having reduced all their forts and cities, he sent Appius to Ticinus to demand Mithridates. He himself went to Missus, which still held out under the command of Callimachus, who by his great engineering skill and his dexterity at all the shifts and subtleties of a siege had greatly incommoded the Romans, for which afterwards he paid dear enough, and was outmaneuvered by Lucullus, who unexpectedly coming upon him at the time of the day when the soldiers used to withdraw and rest themselves, gained part of the wall and forced him to leave the city, in doing which he fired it, either envying the Romans the booty, or to secure his own escape the better. No man looked after those who went off in the ships, but as soon as the fire had seized on most part of the wall, the soldiers prepared themselves for plunder, while Lucullus, pitying the ruin of the city, brought assistance from without, and encouraged his men to extinguish the flame, but all being intent upon the prey and giving no heed to him, with loud outcries beat and clashed their arms together until he was compelled to let them plunder, that by the means he might at least save the city from fire. But they did quite the contrary, for in searching the houses with lights and torches everywhere, they were themselves the cause of the destruction of most of the buildings, inasmuch as when Lucullus the next day went in, he shed tears and said to his friends that they had often before blessed the fortune of Sulla, but never so much admired it as then, because when he was willing, he was also able to save Athens. But my infelicity is such that while I endeavor to imitate him, I become like Mummius. Nevertheless, he endeavored to save as much of the city as he could, and at the same time, also, by happy providence, a fall of rain concurred to extinguish the fire. He himself, while present, repaired the ruins as much as he could, receiving back the inhabitants who had fled, and settling as much as other Greeks as were willing to live there, adding 100 furlongs of ground to the place. Now, whether something is blessed or cursed is often upon, well, how did you acquire it, or how did it come to be, or whatnot? What consciousness or what principles is it being used with? Certainly, invocations and evocations and all that sort of stuff being mixed with it, sure, has a role, but is it the Taoist parable? Maybe not. That is it good fortune or bad fortune? Yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's multiple parables, but you know what I mean. This city was a colony of Athens, built at that time when she flourished, and was powerful at sea, upon which account many who fled from Aristion's tyranny settled there, and were admitted as citizens, but had the ill luck to fly from evils at home into greater abroad. As many of these as survived, Lucullus furnished every one with clothes and 200 drachmas, and sent them away into their own country. On this occasion, Tyrannion the grammarian was taken. Verena begged him of Lucullus, and took him and made him a freedman, but in this he abused Lucullus's favor, who by no means liked that a man of high repute for learning should be first made a slave and then freed, for freedom was thus speciously granted again, was a real deprivation of what he had before, but not in this case alone. Was Verena, I think that's, Verena, the letters partially printed, showed himself far inferior in generosity to the general. And charity is also something that can make something blessed or not, right? Lucullus was now busy in looking after the cities of Asia, and having no war to divert his time, spent it in the administration of law and justice, the want of which had for a long time left the province a prey to the unspeakable and incredible miseries, so plundered and enslaved by tax farmers and usurers that private people were compelled to sell their sons in the flower of their youth, and their daughters in their virginity, and the states publicly to sell their consecrated gifts, pictures, and statues. In the end, their lot was to yield themselves up slaves to their creditors. But before this, worse troubles befell them: tortures inflicted with ropes, and by horses standing abroad to be scorched when the sun was hot, and being driven into ice and clay in the cold. insomuch that slavery was no less than a redemption and joy to them. Lucullus, in a short time, freed the cities from all these evils and oppressions. For first of all, he ordered there should be no more taken than 1%. Secondly, where the interest exceeded the principal, he struck it off. The third and most considerable order was that the creditor should receive the fourth part of the debtor's income, but if any lender had added the interest to his principal, it was utterly disallowed, insomuch that in the span of 4 years all debts were paid and lands returned to their right owners. The public debt was contracted when Asia was fined 20,000 talents by Sulla, but twice as much was paid to the collectors, who, by their usury, had by this time advanced it to 120,000 talents. And governments need to keep track of their interest payments. It's, we act like, oh, this country versus this country. No, it's these, the bankers and people like this that are actually running the show now. But, and accordingly, they obeyed against Lucullus at Rome, and grossly injured by him, and by their money's help, as indeed they were very powerful, and had many of the statesmen in their debt. They stirred up several leading senators against him, but Lucullus was not only beloved by the cities which he obliged, but also wished for by other provinces, who blessed the good luck of those who had such a governor over them. Appius Claudius, who was sent to Tigranes, the same Claudius, was brother to Lucullus's wife, being led by the king's guides a roundabout way, unnecessarily long and tedious, through the upper country, being informed by his freedman, a Syrian by nation, of the direct road, left that lengthy and fallacious one, and bidding the barbarians, they didn't speak their language, his guides, adieu, in a few days passed over Euphrates, and came to Antioch upon Daphne, there being commanded to wait for Tigranes, who at that time was reducing some towns in Phoenicia. He won over many chiefs to his side, who unwillingly submitted to the king of Armenia, among whom was Zarbianus, king of the Gordanians. Also many of the conquered cities corresponded privately with him, whom he assured of relief from Lucullus, but ordered them to lie still at present. The Armenian government was an oppressive one, and intolerable to the Greeks, especially that of the present king, who, growing insolent and overbearing with his success, imagined all things valuable and esteemed among men not only were his in fact, but had been purposely created for him alone. From a small and inconsiderable beginning he had gone on to be the conqueror of many nations, and had humbled the Parthian power more than any before him, and filled Mesopotamia with Greeks, whom he carried in numbers out of Cilicia and Cappadocia. He transplanted also of the Arabs, who lived in the tents, from their country and home, and settled them near him, that by their means he might carry on the trade. He had many kings waiting on him, before he always carried with him his servants and guards, who, when he rode, ran by his horse's side in ordinary underfrocks, and attended him when sitting on his throne, and publishing his decrees to the people with their hands folded together, which posture of all others was that of the most expressed slavery, it being that of men who had bidden adieu to liberty, and had prepared their bodies more for chastisement